you don't know me, I'm the president of the Federalist Society Lawyers Chapter here in Nashville. I'm super excited today to have my friend Josh Blackman talking about the Roberts Court in 2020. We'd love to live in a world in which you can just read the Constitution and predict how all the cases were going to come out based on a original public meeting of everything that goes on. But unfortunately, that's not the case. So we have to have a little bit of a Supreme Court review every year. And so, Josh is going to give that to us. You may not recognize him since we sent out a old picture.
This is my Corona haircut.
But I assure you it's still him. Otherwise, Josh is a great guy. Went to, appropriately, Antonin Scalia Law School. He's the author of 100 Supreme Court cases that everyone should know. Unfortunately, some of those are ones that you don't want to know, but they exist. He's also the founder of Fantasy SCOTUS, which, if you are into fantasy leagues and you're disappointed with sports not returning, it's a perfect time to get involved. Josh is interested in having a laugh track for what's going to be a bit of a satirical take. So if you want to unmute yourself, we would welcome hearing some auditory feedback.
We'll see how this works.
And then otherwise, if you want to see a leak, feel free to email me, Grant@Grantstera. And Josh, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Grant. If you ever watch the old SNLs with Dennis Miller during Weekend Update, that's what I'm going for. If I pull it off, we'll see if it works. We just finished the October 2019 term, and my label for this year was Blue June. Over the past 225 years, the Supreme Court witnessed 2 presidential impeachment trials and 2 pathogenic shutdowns. This past winter, Chief Justice Roberts presided over both in the span of 2 months, and those weren't even the biggest headlines of the year. This term had it all: guns, abortion, Daca, Little Sisters, LGBT discrimination, Trump's tax returns, and more. Plus, don't forget court packing, Chief Justice Kagan, and Blue Monday. Welcome to the October term 2019. And this essay, which I wrote, is inspired by Dave Barry's satirical Year in Review columns, so I will follow the same format. Our saga begins on the first Monday in October, when Justice Brett Kavanaugh took the bench for his first full term. Last year, he joined the court about a week late. Then Judge Kavanaugh had circled the start date on his calendar, but he must have left his planner behind in the Senate. Soon, the other Trump appointee would lose his way in the halls of Congress as well. Bostock versus Clayton County considered whether the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibited discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. For 5 decades, virtually everyone agreed the answer to those questions were no and no. Yet Justice Neil Gorsuch, the proud textualist, struggled, especially after Dean Kagan's Socratic method showed that it is impossible to discriminate against gay people without discriminating on the basis of their sex. During the arguments, Gorsuch said, "This case is really, really close on the textual evidence." But Gorsuch insisted it didn't matter what Congress intended. All that mattered were the words selected by hundreds of white, male, heterosexual, misogynistic, homophobic members of Congress. It's those words that mattered the most. Later in November, the Supreme Court turned into a sieve. In a short period of time, prominent conservatives prayed that Justice Gorsuch would not be led astray by the dark arts of Justice Kagan. This armchair quarterbacking reminded me of conservative efforts to sway Chief Justice Roberts in the Obamacare case through editorials in the National Review and in the Washington Post. Those efforts didn't work in 2012, and they would backfire again here. In November, the biggest case on the docket concerned Daca. President Obama, who also had some trouble finding his way around Congress, used his pen and phone to protect young immigrants from deportation. President Trump tried to cancel Daca with a tweet, #sad. After the arguments, which I attended, it looked like there were 5 votes to allow President Trump to wind down the immigration policy. Once again, Chief Justice Roberts would surprise even his colleagues. Soon, the court would wrap up 2019 in December with a far less controversial topic: guns. The Supreme Court went more than 2 centuries without deciding the scope of the Second Amendment. Then, in the span of 2 years, the justices decided 2 landmark cases: District of Columbia v. Heller in 2008 and McDonald v. City of Chicago 2010. Yet, in the past decade, the court has decided 0 gun cases. We've had crickets. The justices have made clear that the people have an absolute right to keep a gun at home, subject to the state's absolute power to enact gun control laws outside the home, or something like that. Finally, in 2019, the Supreme Court agreed to hear a Second Amendment case. New York had a crazy law that only allowed people to transport their guns from one place to another in an armored truck with a police escort. The government was all too happy to defend its regime in the lower courts. But once the Supreme Court granted certiorari, New York panicked. The legislature repealed the statute, burned it in acid, and sent it aboard the Falcon 9 SpaceX rocket into outer orbit. 5 Democratic senators filed a helpful amicus brief that offered the Chief Justice some new colleagues he couldn't see the case was moot. Senator Whitehouse and others wrote, quote, "The Supreme Court is not well, and the people know it. Perhaps the court can heal itself before the public demands it be restructured in order to reduce the influence of politics." That means court packing. After oral arguments, the Second Amendment looked like it would take its own SpaceX trip to outer space. Soon enough, Roberts would make some new friends in Congress. In January, the House of Representatives finally impeached President Donald J. Trump. You see, he had run up a huge phone bill from an absolutely perfect call to the Ukrainian president. Now, the Chief Justice would have pulled double duty. He presided over oral arguments at the Supreme Court in the morning and presided over the Senate impeachment trial into the wee hours of the night. One day, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the notorious RBG, tagged along. She made a motion to subpoena President Trump's tax returns. In 2016, Ginsburg told the press, "How has he gotten away with not turning over his tax returns?" Majority Leader McConnell said no. He deemed Ginsburg persona non Garland and denied her a hearing. Roberts, who strives to remove any appearance of partisanship from the Supreme Court, tried to remove appearances of partisanship from the Senate. He rebuked both Republicans and Democrats who stepped out of line. And the Chief Justice refused to break any tie votes. In short order, Roberts frustrated senators on both sides of the aisle the same way he frustrates his fellow justices. Soon enough, the trial wound to a close in February with a final vote of 52 to 48. 52 to 48. If you squint, it looks like a 5-4 split. Justice Ginsburg tried to sneak in and cast a vote to convict, but McConnell placed her in a hermetically sealed bubble, which the Sergeant-at-Arms rolled across First Street. Justice Gorsuch, the proud textualist, tried to intervene. He insisted that the Senate, in fact, unanimously voted to convict Trump. He argued, it is impossible to cast a not guilty vote without also casting a vote that uses the word guilty, right? Every not guilty vote is actually a guilty vote. The expectations of the senators are irrelevant. All that matters are the words they chose, and they chose the word guilty. Senator Mitt Romney concurred. Justice Thomas dissented. With the impeachment trial already a distant memory, the Chief Justice was free to return to his full-time job as America's moral compass. But there was a different threat looming on the horizon. The COVID-19 pandemic had begun. Justice Ginsburg proposed a nationwide injunction to stop the spread of the virus. Justice Thomas dissented. He wrote, "No persuasive defense has yet been offered for the practices of nationwide injunctions." Soon, everyone on the court began taking safety precautions. While not on the bench, Ginsburg entered a state of suspended animation. She filled her bubble with Purell. We continue. The court would manage to hear a few more cases in March before the novel coronavirus exploded in the United States. Nothing big. On March 3rd, the justices weighed the constitutionality of the decade-old Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, CELA law versus Cfpb. And on March 4th, the justices took up a controversial abortion law from Louisiana, June Medical Services versus Russo. After oral arguments, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer warned Justices Gorsuch and Kavanaugh that there was a whirlwind in their forecast, a whirlwind. He said, "I want to tell you, Gorsuch, I want to tell you, Kavanaugh, you have released the whirlwind, and you will pay the price. You won't know what hit you if you go forward with these awful decisions." Justice Ginsburg mounted an umbrella on top of her bubble. Chief Justice Roberts responded to his attacks. He said, Schumer's threatening statements were dangerous, and the justices would continue to do their job from whatever quarter, specifically their home quarters. 8 days later, the Supreme Court would shut down. The Chief Justice ordered a mass evacuation and personally rolled RBG's bubble down First Street. Soon, the court canceled all remaining March arguments. Justice Thomas concurred for once. Chief Justice Roberts reminded us that arguments were also postponed in response to the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918 and in 1798 for a yellow fever outbreak. Social distancing, it seems, is subject to stare decisis. The court maintained that the safety of the justices in April was of the utmost concern. The safety of Wisconsin voters, however, was not so important. By a 5-4 vote, the court required Joe Biden to personally lick every absentee ballot envelope to make sure they were postmarked by Election Day. Justice Ginsburg dissented from inside her bubble, but the opinion was not delivered in time. Later that month, the justices finally decided the Second Amendment case. The majority held that the dispute over New York's law, which was rocketing through the asteroid belt, was moot. Justice Alito, Thomas, and Gorsuch, seated 6 feet apart on the bench, delivered fiery dissents to the empty chamber. Justice Alito wrote, quote, by incorrectly dismissing the case as moot, the court permits our docket to be manipulated in a way that should not be countenanced. The members of the majority, practicing social distancing, stayed home. The court would stay at 9 members for now. The justices would not assemble until May, well, virtually at least. No, they didn't use Zoom or some other modern technology. RBG cannot get solid Wi-Fi through her bubble. Instead, the justices connected through old-fashioned pneumatic tubes. True story. The justices had a pneumatic tube system at the court until the 1970s. Justice Breyer had a special line installed in his bathroom. The justices would ask questions in order of seniority. The Chief Justice, the only vote that actually mattered this term, got the most important questions out of the way first. For once, Justice Thomas did not dissent. Instead, he got fired up. Justice Thomas asked 17 questions, 17, during the tax return cases, nearly 6 times as many as asked in the past decade. He was ready to go. Justice Kavanaugh, the junior justice, had to reserve some time on his calendar for the final round of questionings. During this special session, the court heard the latest appeal from the Little Sisters of the Poor. This order of nuns was back at the Supreme Court, fighting for the right to require their employees to take vows of celibacy, or something like that. President Trump also asked the court to help keep his tax returns secret. Why? Citing the census case, he argued that secrecy was needed in order to more effectively enforce the Voting Rights Act. Finally, the justices heard the case of the so-called Faithless Electors. They insisted that Colin Powell should be president. True, they actually voted for Colin Powell in the last election. On the penultimate day of May, the Supreme Court split 5-4 on its second coronavirus-related case. Chief Justice Roberts cast the deciding vote against the South Bay United Pentecostal Church. He held that parishioners could only pray in Las Vegas casinos, where mass congregations were permissible, but not in houses of worship. Justice Gorsuch offered a reading from the Holy Gospel, according to John Roberts. Render unto Caesar's palace the things that are God's. Soon, the court would enter the home stretch. Usually the court wrapped up its term by the end of June, but this term would drag on further. The first 2 weeks of June were uneventful. The biggest case was Financial Oversight and Management Board for Puerto Rico versus Aurelius. Justice Sotomayor suggested that Puerto Rico was an independent nation. Go figure. But on Monday, June 15th, the Supreme Court took a sharp turn to the left. In the span of 30 minutes, the justices handed 3 defeats to conservatives. First, the court denied review in 10 gun cases all at once, exiling the Second Amendment past Pluto. Second, the court denied review in President Trump's challenge to California's sanctuary laws. Now the Golden State was declaring its own independence from the United States. Third, Justice Gorsuch failed to escape Dean Kagan's office hours and ruled that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 had always prohibited LGBT discrimination. The Wall Street Journal praised the rise of the Kagan court. I created the meme. Look at it for a second, it'll click. There it is. You'll never get this one out of your head. This was a huge shift on the court. I dubbed that Monday Blue Monday, but Blue Monday was only the beginning. On Thursday, June 18th, the court decided the Daca case. Chief Justice Roberts joined the Kagan Four. They held that President Trump's tweet winding down Daca failed to comply with the Administrative Procedure Act. The court gave Trump's hashtags a hard look under State Farm and deemed them arbitrary and capricious. On remand, President Trump could consider other possible tweets that only tag the Dreamers' benefits. Blue Monday had turned into Blue Week, and soon the month would become Blue June. Chief Justice Roberts cast the deciding vote to strike down Louisiana's abortion law. He relied on a precedent, Whole Woman's Health, that he thought was wrongly decided. Stare decisis requires Roberts to treat like cases alike unless it is a case he really dislikes. The next case began a slight trend away from Blue June. Really, it was more of a purple blip. The president declared the structure of the Cfpb, the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, unconstitutional. The effect of this decision was not very important, because now President Biden can fire President Trump's holdover director. He earned that perk after leaking all those envelopes in Wisconsin. In the final case of June, Chief Justice Roberts finally threw a bone to conservatives. The court held that Montana could not exclude religious schools from a state-sponsored scholarship program. Quote, a state need not subsidize private education. But once a state decides to do so, it cannot disqualify some private schools solely because they're religious. Here, the court ignored the fact that the scholarship program no longer existed. Chief Justice Roberts later acknowledged that the scholarships could be used for religious studies at Caesar's Palace. Justice Alito assured everyone that the nation was safe from crocodile priests. He actually included this famous Thomas Nast cartoon in his opinion, The American River Ganges. If you look carefully, those crocodiles are actually with the little pontiff hats on their heads, and you see the Vatican in the background. So we are safe. Justice Alito has ensured our security for at least another term. At last, Blue June drew to a close. But the court was not done. For the first time in 3 decades, the court's term would extend beyond July the 4th. Justice Kavanaugh needed a new calendar. RBG's bubble was beginning to fog in the summer heat. There were 5 major cases left for overtime July. First, the court unanimously ruled against the Faithless Electors. Colin Powell would never become president. Second, the court ruled against the Little Sisters of the Poor. The court remanded the sisters to the 10th circle of APA hell, where they will suffer through arbitrary and capricious review. It's a very painful process, if only Dante knew. Justice Ginsburg dissented and wrote that bubbles are effective methods of contraception in the COVID-19 era. Third, the majority decided McGirt versus Oklahoma. Justice Gorsuch wrote the majority opinion and found that eastern Oklahoma in fact belonged to 5 Indian tribes. Here, I think, Gorsuch misread the judgment of King Solomon. Cut the baby in half. That way each of you can have part of him. Justice Gorsuch actually cut the state in half. Finally, the court ruled that President Trump's tax returns cannot be released until after November 3rd, 2020. At that point, no one will care anymore. With all these blockbuster decisions in the can, the Supreme Court's term finally came to an end. Just kidding. By the end of July, the court greenlit federal executions, blocked former felons from voting in Florida, limited how many churchgoers could worship in Nevada, made it tougher for Idaho residents to collect signatures for a ballot initiative, and allowed President Trump to finally build the damn wall. Plus, leaks from the Supreme Court got so bad that Chief Justice Roberts considered resigning. At least I thought he should. And that was all before August had begun. Only 3 months remained till the first Monday in October. Justice Kavanaugh has a date circled on his calendar. Justice Ginsburg is ready to roll in her bubble. Thank you very much. And I have an active presentation after that. Thank you so much. All right. I appreciate the moment to give some levity. It's a very somber world that we live in, and always I try to bring in some positivity. Let's talk a bit, though, about what actually happened this term and why I think it's so significant. For the past decade, it seemed that Justice Kennedy was, the only vote on the court that actually mattered. In any case of substance, people said, what will Kennedy do? What will Kennedy do? And predicting Kennedy was always a tricky task because he had this sort of almost libertarian sensibility where he didn't want to be too much to the right, didn't want to be too much to the left. He always tried to chart this middle course. Some issues were important to him, like federalism and gay rights. Other issues he just didn't really care about. But you could somewhat predict where Kennedy would fall. Well, now Justice Kennedy is off the court, and the new median justice, the swing vote, has become Chief Justice John Roberts. I don't think Roberts is motivated by any sort of ideology, right? He's not libertarian. I don't think he has a particularly conservative ideology. I think he's motivated by a desire to avoid controversy, right? He thinks that the best way for the court to approach its job is to stay out of every controversy imaginable. It's to make it seem like the court's not doing much. Unless it's an issue he really cares about, he will pull back the reins in any given case. And this term, I think we saw that approach in several of the cases I mentioned. In the gun case, the chief voted to render the controversy moot. And then Roberts basically required his colleagues to not take any other cases. There's some reporting from CNN which suggests that Roberts signaled, if you take another gun case, we'll rule against the Second Amendment. I think Roberts did this in the Little Sisters of the Poor case as well. Rather than ruling on whether the sisters have this religious liberty interest in not having these mandates foisted upon them, the court said, okay, we'll rule narrowly that Trump can do this, but send it back to the lower courts for further review, with actually resolving the issue. I think we saw this as well in the tax return case. The court didn't rule definitively whether Congress could request those returns. The court simply said, well, the interest they gave is not enough. Go back to the lower court and try again. In the New York District Attorney case, the court didn't actually rule that the tax returns must be turned over. It said, well, go back to the lower court and try again. You're sensing a pattern, right? In every major case in the Roberts court so far, the remedy has been, go to the lower court and try it again. Keep kicking the can down the road. And when you keep kicking the can down the road, eventually you have to get to the end of the road, but you never do, right? It's a sort of never-ending struggle where you're always kicking, and not actually resolving the issues. Frankly, the modus operandi of the Roberts court is just decide nothing. Just do as little as possible and keep your name to the headlines. And perhaps Roberts is succeeding in one limited regard. This past year, polling was done about the popularity of the court. And quite remarkably, the court is evenly popular between Republicans and Democrats. For the first time in a while, both Republicans and Democrats like the court at roughly the same level. I think that's what Roberts is trying to do. Now, I think there are costs to this approach. I think we're all lawyers, at least most of us in this court are attorneys. We can sort of see through what's going on, right? That the court is not deciding cases based on the best legal arguments. The court is deciding cases based on these sort of considerations of other factors that are very hard to pin down. And I do think there's a cost to this approach. You can sense in some of the opinions of frustration from Justice Thomas, Alito, sometimes Kavanaugh, sometimes Gorsuch, that the court is not functioning as a court, right? That John Roberts' only jurisprudence is the Gallup poll, right? That's what grounds his approach to the law. And I think that this sort of tension in the court is spilling over in the form of leaks. Now, I do want to talk about the leaks for a few moments. I'm sure some of you clerk for judges, or if not, you know judges well. Maybe I've judged on this call. One of the most basic tenets of working in a court is confidentiality. This is a big one. Judges instruct their law clerks very clearly not to discuss confidential matters in public. Judges don't talk about their matters in public. Attorneys cannot speak ex parte to a judge about a case. All communications must be made in a public forum. Why? Right? Now, I know we all have these rules, but why is it so important for courts to maintain confidentiality? You probably never even think about this question, but why is it so important? I think the answer has a lot to do with what courts actually do, right? When a judge writes an opinion that says, in the case of A versus B, A prevails and B must pay A damages, right? That's one opinion. Not everyone agrees with it. I'm sure B is very sore because he lost the case. But people generally follow courts because we think, well, they're these sort of neutral figures and they, they're going about their process in a very deliberative way, and we'll respect their judgment. But what happens when that curtain gets peeled back, right? What happens when we get a little, like, think of the Wizard of Oz, right? When you pull the curtain back and you see there's this little guy with a microphone. What happens when people start seeing that the courts aren't resolving cases in this sort of neutral, objective fashion, but they're making expressly political judgments? They're calculating which approach would cause the fewest ripples, right? Where they're saying, well, we don't really care what the best argument is. What matters to us is how to avoid controversy. What happens when people start seeing how the sausage is made, so to speak? I don't think it's pretty. I think there's a very good reason we don't see the court's private conferences. If we did, I think it'd be dispiriting, right? Forget broadcasting the oral arguments. What if we actually live stream the conference where they start negotiating and hashing how to write an opinion? I think that would do serious damage to the court's reputation, because we'll see what the court's doing is not what we think courts are doing. So I have a bit of an unorthodox take. I think the fact that the court's leaking wounds the court's legitimacy far more than a 5-4 decision. I think it signals that what the court's doing is not law. It's doing this sort of amateur rank political game. Okay, so that's why I think leaks are bad, just at the outset. You can disagree with me, which is fine. But in the past 2 years, we've seen stunning leaks from the Supreme Court. Not just, a little bit here, a little bit there. Systematic accountings of the entire term. Last year, we had leaks about the census case. This was President Trump's efforts to put a citizenship question on the census. And shortly after the term, CNN reports that Chief Justice Roberts changed his mind. And he decided to rule against Trump fairly late in the game, so they had to rewrite their opinions. That signals to the public that perhaps Roberts was concerned about some of the political perceptions of his opinion, right? If the court ruled for Trump in light of some of the stuff that came out, how would that be perceived? Now, I think judges can change their minds. I don't think that they're stuck in stone. But I think the rationale for why they change their minds matters. This term, CNN leveled up. They published a 4-part series that documented with precision the internal deliberations on several of these key cases. But more so than what was leaked, I think it's important to ask, why is this information being leaked? In other words, who's talking to the press and why are they doing it? I think all these stories convey very specific narratives, right? You can almost hear the voices of the people talking to the press. Some of these leaks make the Chief Justice look strong and decisive. Some of the leaks make Justice Gorsuch look very committed to his cause, not wavering. Poor Justice Kavanaugh looks very weak and ineffective. The stories goes, he would circulate these memos which no one cared about. That they sort of, Kavanaugh said, let's try this other way of resolving the case, and just no one cared what he said. It's like, sit down, son. You're the junior justice. No one cares what you think. And then you have Justice Kagan sort of lurking in the background, forming these moderate coalitions. And I think these leaks have significant effects. I think they destroy trust and camaraderie in the court. If the justices can't be sure that their communications are kept in confidence, then they won't trust their colleagues. I think relationships become distant, and the workplace becomes toxic. These leaks, I think, are merely symptoms, right? I don't think the leaks are the problem themselves. I think the leaks reflect a greater crisis that's hidden from the public. In some regards, the leaks are acting like whistleblowers. They think something bad's going on, and they've decided to publicize it so people know what's going on behind the scenes. I don't know why, but it's there. Now, I think this sort of toxic culture may come as a shock. It's like, well, the justices look like they get along so well. They look so friendly. Okay. You're all attorneys. You work with organizations. Every single organization in the United States has toxic culture of some sort. All of them do. Now, imagine you're an organization where people have life tenure, they can't be removed, and they have complete unfettered power to do whatever they want. Do we really think that these are people who are like oracles, that they hold their job off, perfectly? Or they're humans? I think they're human. And I think when you have this sort of organization with no scrutiny, no oversight, that stuff's going on that's probably not visible to the public. And I think these leaks are reactions to those struggles. And we see it spill through in opinions every now and then. I don't buy the narrative that, oh, we're all friends, we all love each other. It's hard in any organization with a small number of people to have these conflict and contentious interactions every year after year with very low turnover. They're only human. All right, let me look ahead a bit till next term, and then I'll be happy to take some questions from the audience. my virtual audience at least. We have a couple big cases next year coming up. Of course, the term begins the first Monday in October. One of the biggest cases involves LGBT adoption. The city of Philadelphia has a policy that if you want to participate in the adoption process, you have to comply with the city's non-discrimination ordinance. And one of those principles is you cannot discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation. Now, you can imagine that there's some Catholic charities that do adoption and foster service work that, as a matter of course, will not place a child with a couple that doesn't comply with Catholic teachings, for example, a gay couple. The Third Circuit found that this regime was perfectly fine under Employment Division versus Smith. This case tees up that question. So first, under current practice, does it violate the First Amendment to condition a Catholic charity's ability to participate in the program by not placing these kids in gay families? But also the case calls on the court to reconsider Employment Division versus Smith. This is a huge issue. However broad the Bostock decision was, the Title VII decision I mentioned, this could radically alter free exercise law nationwide. Because if every state is now subject to a strict scrutiny standard for free exercise, a lot of the concerns with the Bostock case fade. Not fade, but they're reduced. So this is a huge case. I don't know if there are 5 votes over Earl Smith. And I'll be perfectly frank, from my vantage point, I don't know if Smith was wrong. It was a Scalia opinion. I go back and forth. I think it's a hard case. Whatever the court does here will have ripples. The next major case from this term involves Obamacare. Yes, Obamacare. It never seems to go away. I've written 2 books on the Affordable Care Act, and I'll be writing a 3rd one in about a year or so. This is the latest challenge to the ACA. You may recall in 2017, Congress reduced the penalty in the ACA to $0.00. And the argument goes, by reducing the penalty to $0, that the section of the ACA, Section 5008, cannot be construed as a tax. And because it cannot be construed as a tax, then the mandate becomes unconstitutional. And because the mandate's unconstitutional, that other parts of the law must fall. I filed an amicus brief on behalf of the Cato Institute. I don't think the entire law falls. I think part of it probably should. I'll be happy to answer that during Q&A if you'd like. But this is a huge case. The upshot, though, is that this is going to be decided after the election. Indeed, the court scheduled arguments for November 10th, 1 week after the election. Could you imagine this case being argued like on election day right before? It would be a disaster. So I think the court prudently postponed the arguments. Another major case is called Collins v. Mnuchin. Collins v. Mnuchin. This case is a follow-up to SELA law versus CFPB. This case considers the constitutionality of the Federal Housing Finance Agency. This is an agency with a single director who has what's called for-cause protection. And the question is whether this agency is now unconstitutionally structured. Win or lose, it doesn't really matter, because what the court will simply say is that the for-cause protection must go, but we'll see. We'll see what happens there. I'm not expecting much beyond SELA law, but who knows? Of course, the docket has not been fully fleshed out, but we're going to get election cases. Oh, you know it. You know it. Already the court's decided a handful of small election cases where various judges have tried to loosen voting restrictions to deal with COVID. For example, how many signatures are required to gather, whether you can gather signatures electronically. All of these cases so far, the court has more or less rejected efforts to change the rules. But there's one important caveat. There was a Rhode Island case where the government of Rhode Island wanted to make it easier to vote, and Republicans came in to challenge those rules. Surprise, surprise. And the court said, no, you can't do that. We'll defer to the government. So I think that The upshot is, in any state where it's the government imposing some sort of waiver, the court will stand by it. And where it's a court using an injunction to change the rules, the court will stay it. What the heck does that mean? I don't know. We may have, a Bush v. Gore style dispute. Call it Trump v. Biden, I suppose. From the Florida Supreme Court, from the Wisconsin Supreme Court, from the Arizona Supreme Court. Lord help us. From the Michigan Supreme Court. I mean, just look at the map and think of all the difficulties people have had voting over the last few months. Think of the absentee ballots that are going to be buried with Jimmy Hoffa's grave. Things are going to get very ugly over the next few months. I just sort of want to fast forward till 2021, but it doesn't work like that. We don't have that technology. But what we do know is that the court deciding these issues is sharply divided. And really only one vote matters. And of course, that is Chief Justice Roberts. I will stop here, and I welcome your questions, and I thank you all for your attention. Thank you. And if you have a question, you just raise your hand on the Zoom, and I'll be happy to call on you. Questions? Not all at once. Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Well, thanks very much for that presentation, Josh. And I just wondered if you would be willing to expand a little bit more on your ACA comments and your thoughts on perhaps only part of that statute being struck down.
Sure, I'd be happy to. The ACA case is complicated for a lot of reasons. One of them is that no one actually wants this case to succeed. If the Republican states are actually successful in killing Obamacare, it would be a disaster because there's really no statutory backup plan, right? There's no plan B. Had the court killed Obamacare in 2012, so what? No big deal, right? The law really hadn't gone into effect. But now it's a central portion of our economy. It can't be extricated. I have put in an amicus brief with the Cato Institute. We take some of a different position. Let me walk you through 3 steps. First, we focus on the injury to the individual plaintiffs, right? It's not just Texas. You have private plaintiffs who have challenged the law. And they argue that the mandate imposes an obligation upon them. I agree with that. In 2012, in the Obamacare case, it's the first time, the Article 3 injury was based on the mandate. It was not based on the penalty. This is a common misconception. The fact that people might pay some money down the road did not cause the Article 3 injury. What caused the Article 3 injury was that they were required to obtain insurance, period. That was the basis of the injury. That injury still exists today. There's still a mandate to buy insurance. So step 1, we think they're standing. Okay, so step 2, if there is a mandate to buy insurance, can it be saved as a tax? And the short answer is it cannot. The ACA no longer raises revenue. It falls outside the bounds of the chief saving construction. The second part's actually the easiest. If once you get over standing, the mandate's unconstitutional. I think pretty much everyone, not everyone, but most parties will concede that. The ballgame, though, is on the third factor, which is a remedy. And I can tell you that the Supreme Court's approach to severability is in flux. I can point you to Justice Thomas's concurrence in Murphy versus NCAA. This was a case about online sports gambling. And Thomas makes an important point that I think is worth studying. Courts do not strike down laws. We use this phrase, strike down this and strike down that. It's actually not accurate. Courts merely declare or enjoin specific provisions of laws. Courts don't have the power to just strike the law. Okay, that's point number 1. Point number 2 involves standing. Generally, the courts will not consider the law's constitutionality unless it injures someone, right? I can't go to court and say, I don't like this law because it's bad. So how does it injure you? But severability provides an exception to that rule. With severability, the court can declare unconstitutional parts of the law that do not injure you. How can that be? How can a law be set aside if it doesn't injure you. Seems to violate Article 3, doesn't it? We've built our argument on top of Thomas's opinion. The only portions of the law that injure people are the mandate, as well as the law's community rating and guaranteed issue provisions. These are the pre-existing condition regulations. The injury being felt is that there's a force to buy insurance you don't want. And what's making you buy insurance you don't want are those three provisions: the mandate, guaranteed issue, and community rating. I think all those three laws have to rise or fall together, and they're unconstitutional because that's what causes the injury. We have one final step in the process. We don't say that the guaranteed issue and community rating should be killed everywhere. The ACA has a unique structure. We have a marketplace, healthcare.gov, and states have their own marketplaces, and we have the off-marketplace. If people want to go in the marketplace and buy an insurance policy through the government, they can't complain about government mandates. So our remedy will be limited to the off-exchange policies. If you obtain a policy off the exchange, you'll be able to obtain it without the guaranteed issue or have no policy at all. But if you want to go on to the exchange, you can't complain about the mandate. You can't complain about the regulations. So the upshot of our opinion is that we leave, well, not my opinion, but our brief, wishful thinking, I suppose. The upshot of our brief is that we leave the ACA largely in place, but we give people an out. That if they don't want to be bound by the mandate, they don't have to buy anything. And if they want to buy insurance that's unencumbered by the regulations, they can buy these free policies or these unregulated policies off the exchange. But everyone else is still stuck by it. That's the opinion in a nutshell. I think it's probably a reach to even consider this going forward. But I think it's unlikely the court kills the entire law, so I want to give perhaps an alternate way of resolving it. Answer your question? Yeah, Joseph, go ahead. I think you're on mute.
Are there any cases working their way through the system that will give the court an opportunity to visit the question of the propriety of nationwide injunctions?
Yeah, it's a good question. I alluded to the nationwide injunctions in my little satirical riff on COVID. So just a point of terminology. The phrase nationwide injunction is not particularly helpful, and let me explain why. Let's say you're a company like General Electric and you have offices in all 50 states. If there's an injunction against GE, by definition, it will apply in all 50 states. And there's nothing problematic against an injunction that spans outside the borders of a court. The problem is actually what's called a non-party injunction. That is, the government can issue an injunction for people who are not before them. So let's say two plaintiffs go to the court arguing that something Trump did was illegal. The court says, yes, Trump broke the law. In a normal world, the remedy would be limited to those two people. Trump cannot enforce the legal action against those people, or they can certify a class with Rule 23, class action. But the so-called nationwide injunctions are different. It says, well, Trump's actions are illegal, therefore he can't enforce this anywhere against anyone around the world. Those are the problematic elements, and let me explain to you why. When you have a nationwide injunction, litigation becomes a standstill. There's no percolation. As soon as one judge issues a nationwide injunction, it's over. Doesn't matter. The ballgame's over, right? You can have 4 judges deny injunctions and the 5th one grant it, and the other 4 judges are irrelevant. Because once you grant the injunction, it's like a battleship. It has to stop and it can't go anywhere. You can't sort of move around. I litigated 3D printed gun cases. I'm involved with that litigation. 2 years ago, we were sued in 5 different courts at once, pretty much. I prevailed on 4 motions for TROs. I won in 4 cases. But the 5th one, I lost. The 5th one was a nationwide injunction. So I actually prevailed on my first 4 motions, and I lost the 5th one. No, I'm sorry. I prevailed in the first 3, I lost in the 4th. But it didn't matter what happened to the first 3, because you lose the 4th, it's over. Now, for the court to resolve the nationwide injunction issue, it has to be a very unique posture. The court has to find that the action was legal, but the injunction was improper, right? In the normal case, the court says, well, the action is illegal, so the remedy doesn't matter, right? But they say, well, the action was illegal, but you can only enforce it in these specific cases. And the court hasn't gotten there yet. I don't think the court wants to resolve this issue. I know Republicans are complaining about nationwide injunctions now. If President Biden comes into office, you will be loving those nationwide injunctions in a couple months. So I think the court is just sort of leaving those undecided, but I think they are problematic. Okay, other questions? I see there's a question in the chat. Someone wrote that Chief Justice Roberts is motivated by intent to be popular. He creates favorable attention from the news media. He likes to be thought of as a swing vote. He should enjoy it while he can. And this is someone who thinks Amy Coney Barrett will be the next Supreme Court Justice. Roberts will be a lot less important. Well, that's true. If we have a Justice Barrett, Roberts becomes very unimportant. I think he becomes just basically another, Breyer, right? Just what he thinks doesn't really matter. But then I think at that point, Gorsuch becomes the median vote, and Lord help us what that means. Look, all I'm saying is you guys don't know, what's the phrase? I prefer the devil I know to the devil I don't. I knew Kennedy, and now I know Roberts. I don't know what comes next. I don't know what a Gorsuch swing vote looks like. I really don't have the answer to that question. I have no prediction. Yeah, Shaka, good to see you. I haven't seen you in a while.
Hey, Josh, good to see you. Your pandemic haircut's looking a bit like mine. So
man, this thing is 5 months in.
Yeah, fantastic. No, thank you so much for your presentation. So the question that I've got is really asking you to look into the crystal ball a little bit. There's a lawsuit that was just filed against the Trump administration by TikTok.
Yeah, I saw that.
And it has to do with, Trump signed an executive order against TikTok that deals with the International Emergency Economic Powers Act.
Yeah.
Is there much jurisprudence on this? And because it seems to me to have really broad implications.
Yeah.
Executive powers stopping massive technology companies. That could go lots of different ways, particularly if there's an administration change or even if there's not.
Yeah. Let me take a step back, Shaka. You're a little bit more hip than most people. Does everyone know what TikTok is? I can't assume people know. TikTok is a social...
And I only barely know it. I don't use it, Josh.
Yeah, it's like, hickory dickory dock, right? TikTok. TikTok is a social media platform where people come up with these short video clips to a social media platform. If you know what Twitter is, it's like Twitter, but instead of using words, use videos. Okay. I've never used it. I know it's quite popular. TikTok is owned by a Chinese company. And as you probably know, any company in China has to basically do whatever China says. If China says turn over your records, they turn over the records. It turns out that a lot of Americans are using TikTok, and they're using these apps on their phones, and people in the military are using TikTok, and people in corporate America are using TikTok, and people are worried that this is going to be an espionage risk, that the Chinese will infiltrate American smartphones and download people's memes and stuff. I don't know, right? So that there are these risks. So President Trump basically said TikTok must sell to another American company or else I'm going to shut it down. As always with President Trump, there's dual motivations. One, I think there's a legitimate concern that TikTok is going to engage in espionage. I think it's a non-trivial concern. People underestimate China. I think this concern is legitimate. On the other hand, Trump hates China, right? And he thinks China doesn't like him, so they're trying to fight a trade war with China. Put aside the policy. Does Trump have the power to do this? So we have one of my favorite acronyms in the U.S. Code, IEPA, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. This is a broad statute from the late 1970s that gives the president certain emergency powers. Its most famous treatment was in a case called Daines and More v. Reagan from 1981 or so. This is when President Reagan suspended claims against the Iranian government in the wake of the hostage crisis. And the court upheld this 9-0. IEPA is pretty broad, right? It's really broad, and it gives the president a lot of powers that are not specified. The lawyer for IEPA. Her name is Beth Brinkman, who is in the news. She was actually Judge Sullivan's lawyer as well in the en banc case. Brinkman actually raised a non-delegation argument, saying that this statute cannot give the president such power to shut down TikTok. She also raised a due process argument that basically TikTok was summarily executed, that there was no process given. Sort of Trump just tweeted it and that was it. There's also some First Amendment issues. Shaka mentions in the chat that there might be retaliation, right? TikTok is a very effective platform to oppose President Trump. You might want to shut it down. We know Trump doesn't like Twitter because they censor his tweets, apparently. All right, so this is like this perfect storm. Now, I can't imagine the Supreme Court. Well, let me answer the question this way, Shaka. A lot of the rulings against Trump have been very narrow, but if the court actually hold that IEPA has constitutional difficulties, that would hamstring not only a President Trump, but a President Biden. And I think the courts may be very leery of putting handcuffs on IEPA, especially, in our world, which is so much insane stuff going on. So I don't know if this worked. Maybe there'll be some, his tweet did not comply with the EPA. I don't know. There might be some minor technical reason why this specific shutdown is not valid. I'd be very... my crystal ball says Congress, the court doesn't hamstring IEPA, because this is a law that is used in unknown circumstances. That even with the pandemic to block entry, IEPA factored into it. That's my short answer. All right, other questions?
Well, Josh, I think we're coming up on the last part of the hour. Really appreciate you talking to us today.
Well, it's my pleasure. Hopefully my presentation didn't put anyone to sleep, but I enjoyed it very much. Oh, Wayne, go ahead, Wayne.
Yes, thank you so much, Professor. Just one more quick question. Based on the Daca decision, where Chief Justice Roberts essentially would not allow the Trump administration to overturn or stop and potentially illegal executive action, what do you think would happen if the Biden administration looks to be impending? Do you think that this administrative law changes, that the Trump administration could put a lot of different executive actions into place, and that the court is going to abide by that same posture of basically not really allowing the Biden administration to go in and overturn or stop these executive policies? I mean, what do you think that looks like if we have a change of administrations with a lot of new executive actions taking place right before that change?
Oh, excellent question. This is the John Yoo theory. If you heard of John Yoo's piece, the argument is that the argument is this: in order to undo a policy to jump through hoops, and if Trump is able to flood the box and get all these policies in writing, and that Biden can't undo them right away, he's going to be stuck with them. I think we're already seeing a bit of that with Daca. The Trump administration did something very smart, which is, rare. Most things they do are not very well done. This was actually, I think, a pretty well done approach. Trump said, okay, we're going to leave Daca in place. We're just not going to grant any new applications. Huh? Well, the policy's in place. We just won't grant any new ones. And that's a new policy. And if that policy is upheld, then Biden will be stuck with that policy where he can't grant new applications. And if he tries to undo that one, he'll have to explain why he's undoing it. In other words, the reliance interest is canceling existing DACA grants. But if you've never had it, how can you rely on it? So basically, Trump is trying to box Biden into the wall if he loses. If Trump wins, I guess litigation is different. But I think they're trying to basically box Biden in to the extent they can. This was actually done very well. But Wayne, you asked a good question, and I think it's very, much of the Trump administration's errors were self-enforced, right? They're self-inflicted wounds. They made so many errors throughout the last, almost 4 years. Maybe now they can get their act together a little bit. All right, anything else? Grant, can we adjourn?
We sure can. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. This was fun. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks a lot.
If you have any questions, please email me.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.